Hello, my name's Jorb. I love gear, and this is the Vongon replay. It is a 6-voice virtual analog synth from Vongon, and just like the polyphrase and the Ultra Shear, it starts with inspiration from vintage hardware, and they put those sounds in a modern case with impeccable styling. I love the way this looks. Here on the replay, the inspiration is very proudly the Juno, which I know well. There it is in the room, and the Poly 6, which I know well. There it is in the room. And starting with those instruments will give you a good understanding of what it's like to use the replay and the sort of sounds you can expect from it. And I bring that up because that sort of broad strokes approach to product design or choosing a product really appeals to me. The idea that vintage sounds and vintage designs are interesting, are worth it, and still have a place in modern production. If you're really keyed in, you'll know that this came out a while ago, and I'm a little bit late to the party. I did have it at release, but there were some firmware things that I felt like needed to change before I talked about it. I said that to Vongon. They made some of those changes. They fixed some of those things, so here I am talking about it. That was kind of what I needed for the green light, was that sort of like confirmation that they're willing to make changes and are receptive to feedback. That's when I knew it was time to talk about it, which was, first of all, they made those changes months ago. I'm late to this, even considering that. But anyway, I think that's all you need to know. Thanks to Vongon for sponsoring the video. If you're subscribed, thanks for coming back. If you're a patron, it means the world to me. If you aren't either, consider supporting me however you want, subscribing, following me on Instagram, use my affiliate links, whatever works for you. That's it. Let's make some sounds. Here we are on the table with the replay. Very simple sound. That reverb is from the Hall of Fame, which is probably the cheapest, like, true stereo and stereo out reverb I would still consistently recommend. Really is good. Really, really simple sound to start, because that's pretty much what you get out of this, and what I think it's very, very good at. But anyway, this sort of walkthrough isn't the way I would normally do this, but you'll understand why in a second. There's a bunch of stuff on the panel, super straightforward, super simple. There's a bunch of hidden functions that you can get to from Alt and the keyboard, or using a software editor on a computer. I'm going to start by going through just what's on the panel. That, to me, is kind of the sell of this, is how easy it is to configure on the panel. And then I'll walk through all the extra stuff that you have alt functions for. To me, everything that's on the panel is great. I'm going to start, this will be a sort of initialized patch. Let me get the panel closer to what it is you're hearing now. Okay, so your oscillator on the panel, you have 2 waveforms. There are more in the hidden functions, but let's just start with this. Sawtooth, I think sounds great. And a square, which you can hear. Has variable pulse width. Right now it's pointed to the LFO. Very, very good. Very, very classic. The filter is
4-pole low pass.
And was one of the first things I really, really complimented Vongon on when I was giving him feedback right when I had this. I honestly think this filter sounds fantastic. Especially if we get some envelope moving. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. We have a single envelope. Sounds great. Very good virtual analog. Filter, that can also track the keyboard. And if I turn to the middle switch here, if I turn the oscillator switch to the middle here, that's off. I turn off all the other modulation. We can track the keyboard. I think that sounds good. Again, that to me is a sign of a very, very good virtual analog filter. But back to our oscillator again. And then, like a lot of vintage synths, you'll see it everywhere. This is inspired by the Juno and the Poly 6. Just a single envelope that controls our VCF and our VCA, which is a control approach I really, really like, especially here when it's combined with more flexibility than you might think. So the VCA by default points to the same envelope as the filter. They rise and fall tied to that same CV. Turn this, if I flip this switch to the bottom, we have a gate, which means the VCA is just tied to if a key is on or off. It's all the way open or it's all the way closed if a key is on or off. So if I add a bunch of movement to the filter, that lets us hear our attack and decay stages really, really clearly. Because we have full level, full volume of the VCA present, to hear all those filter changes. If I change that back to envelope, anyway, I probably explained that for too long. That's too many examples, but you get the point. Anyway, in the middle here, this is gate plus release. So we have gated on, but the tail of an envelope. So we have this control separation of our VCA and our VCF, which is what you gain from having two separate envelopes, and all the benefits of how simple it is to just look at these four and know what shape it is. I think that's super, super clever. I can't even think of what else I've seen it on, but I know it's, I don't think it started here, but I just think the implementation here is so, so clever. And not to compare negatively to something else that I think is still pretty good, the Nymphs, the Dreadbox Nymphs, you're doing alt functions to change something as fundamental as your amp envelope. I think it would have been so much easier if by default these just controlled one envelope, and that's what we have here, and I'm really seeing the benefits of not having to go into alt functions that often. I think it's a really, really clever way to not have two envelopes and have a lot of the control, a lot of the flexibility you would get from two envelopes. Anyway, you noticed I turned on the LFO. The LFO, pretty simple, can go to our filter or our oscillator. That's its full speed and its slowest speed. I think just like pretty much every control in here, it's really, really well tuned range, I should say. It seems very intentionally chosen to be where it's at. It also has, one of my favorite things about the Juno and the Poly 6, I guess, is this delay feature where it's almost an attack envelope to the LFO coming in. So listen, right when I hit, no modulation, but as that rings out, it gets to come in. And it fades in the level, not the speed. Such, again, a really, really good touch. I think the only thing I missed was noise that you can mix in with the oscillator, which is a good touch. That can also be an external input. That's not something I ever really take advantage of. And I haven't done it on this, I must admit. It's just not something I find myself doing. But I do think noise is a nice touch. So that's pretty much every control for synthesis that's on the panel. And it is pretty clearly vintage inspired. And I think, one, that is enough. And that's sort of why this is an interesting thing to have come out. The idea that old school synthesizers, there is more flexibility here than you think there is. Even if we're just thinking about the panel, I'm ignoring the alt functions still, okay? This is a lot of potential sounds. This is a lot of potential synthesis. And I don't think that it's worth rolling your eyes, it's something that's vintage inspired. I think there's a lot to be said for vintage inspired, not just from the sound, but from the control perspective. And this is like worth talking about in that way. I think that is like a lot of why I'm happy to talk about this. But this also does a whole lot more. There's a web editor that makes it really easy to access, but there's also alt functions. I'll pull up a part of the manual online. Most of the keys, or the first 2 octaves, I guess, have a sort of hidden function to them. And they are different waveforms for the oscillator. They're different waveforms for the LFO. There's some synthesis sort of control settings. I'm happy they're all here. There's a lot that I would have loved to have on the panel. That's why I've sort of like broken this into 2 halves, because it's awesome that they're here, but I wish like this oscillator selection has 3 positions, and it gives us access to 2 of the 4 waves we can have. Yeah. If this was a slider, that had access to that, I think that would have saved a lot of time. To show you, if I hold Alt and I press this first C, our oscillator will be a triangle. Noise is a little overpowering there. That's a sound I love. Alt, and this will be a C sharp. This is a sine wave. Again, tons of flexibility from just those 2 things. You're immediately brought beyond what you can do on the 106 and the Poly 6. And it's the sort of thing I think earns panel real estate. For a while, I have some remnants of it here. With something I did when I was making the full bank of patches, I had painter's tape like right in front of this, lined up with what all the hidden functions were. I had it on the panel for a little bit, but then I immediately got nervous about residue and took it off and cleaned it up. But things like other oscillator waveforms and pulse width being manual is here, first D. Things like that and the oscillator waveforms, I would have really preferred to see that on the panel. But the fact that it's here is so much more important than that. You also have something that I think is like kind of forgotten about from old school polyphonic synthesizers, Poly 1 and Poly 2 sort of voice allocation modes. So it sort of decides which notes you're going to steal or if you're going to steal notes. It's a sort of a voice stealing functionality, I guess. So if those all ring out. This is Poly 1. If I go to Poly 2, the voice allocation starts from the beginning every time in Poly 2. So you can have like dense chords like that not overlap at all. And its inclusion here, I think, pays respect to what was clever and unique about those old designs in a way that a lot of the other modern stuff kind of overlooks. That is so different to, this would be Poly 1, I think. Yeah, Poly 2. It lets you play differently. It lets the part musically come out sort of with a very different result. I love, love, love that inclusion. There's also a mono mode. Very, very nice touch, again, for certain patches. I'm having this idea right now. I'm going to get my laptop and run the editor. And if I'm running the editor, you can see all the options change and sort of understand what it is we're working with. And I'll walk through a bunch of the patches I made. That's where I made them. I made them in that desktop editor, so it'll be so much easier to show you through that interface. Anyway, there we go. You can see the hint of my laptop over here, but I'll have the full screen up there. Here's the editor. Immediately, it's like, look at all these options for the LFO, look at all these options for the waveform. Like you saw earlier, you can hold Alt and press keyboard keys to get there, but it's so much easier to see your options and think about where to go next. And it's, it slows me down so much to sort of look at the manual like that. Anyway, if I hold load and pick a preset, you'll see it's reflected immediately on the panel. In our web editor there, which is just online. I think this is just a better way to sort of show you what's going on. So I have this sort of initialized patch set up here on that C sharp. And And I sort of branch out of there to make any of my sounds, or I did to make everything that's on here. And I did a full bank. I think you would have heard this one already. Just a pretty normal, brassy. Sound. This third one here is the first sort of a very different LFO introduction. This is a smooth sample and hold. Something I love, love, love. This also uses glide, which for some reason was highlighted there. Great. Fourth one, I think this is the organ I made. Yeah. This relies on full keyboard tracking on a resonant filter, and it's tuned like a second oscillator, and the first oscillator is on a triangle wave. To me, sort of organy. Very organy. And I'm sort of walking through these to just be like, look at how much potential there is, especially when you take into account these extra waves for the LFO and the oscillator. There is so much here. Here's a good one. This is square wave on the LFO. And an inverted envelope, so you subtract from the cutoff whenever you have the envelope set to. Again, can't do that without some of these hidden functions. That would be now here. That's sawtooth on the LFO. That whole sound is here from that sawtooth that's sort of ramping, that sawtooth that's sort of rising. I wish there was a way to just click next into presets because I'm forgetting what key I hit to get there. Was that the same one? Yeah. This is my sort of attempt at a Rhodes sound. A little bit of noise. Sustain is down, so this will eventually die down to nothing, but still with a pretty long decay. And that sort of tremolo, mono tremolo being emulated with the filter. But this is only possible because of what goes beyond the vintage synths. I know I'm making that point a lot. This is entirely possible because of the sine wave. And I guess while I'm talking so much about oscillator waveforms, I will say something I think is just missing. It's not like, I wish they would have had that. I do think it should be here. If you're going to be explicitly inspired by the Juno and the Poly 6, a sub-oscillator, even if it is, like not like fully featured or flexible or variable. On the Juno, it has its own level. On the Poly 6, it's behind me. I'm pretty sure it's just a switch. It is just a switch for off 1 octave down or 2 octave down. Or also simultaneous waveforms, like the Juno saw in square at the same time. I think that gets you closer to the vintage-inspired thing that this is, saying that it is. And it would be really, really nice to have. Even, we have more alt functions available, or alt and a knob. What if alt and noise is a level of a sub-oscillator? Just a suggestion, but I do think that should be here. That thought is completely done. Separately, I love that we have a sine wave. Because I love sounds like this, and now I'm not giving up my filter, and my filter can be what gives us that sort of tremolo movement. Again, that's something you couldn't even come close to on a Juno or Poly 6. I digress. If I can find any more really good ones. This is my sort of, you know, you're in the first half of the last bank of a vintage synthesizer, where they start giving you things that aren't based on orchestra instruments. They start getting weird. This is a sort of using this sample and hold, smooth sample and hold LFO shape to make a sort of tape crinkled thing. I'm using this LFO to control the filter and the pitch and the pulse width. So just like a tape crinkle, it sort of affects everything. It affects the pitch and the volume. The pulse width is giving us a sort of timbral change. Or a sort of a pseudo filtering, I guess. And then I've noticed a quirk of the voice allocation. If I just run through the rest of my voices with enough release that they, you know, take up all 6, even if I'm still holding down 2 notes, they go away. But if I turn release down, they'll stay. I feel like as long as a note is held down, it shouldn't get stolen from. Regardless, I'm going to email that to Vongon right away. I don't know if that's intended or not. It feels to me like it shouldn't be there. Regardless, so these last 5 are mono sounds. Sort of an SH-101 style bass, sort of tubby plastic. I think it's nailing that. I think it sounds so good. And this is using the mono voice mode. So this would be here. I think this is, yeah, that sort of theremin sound. Definitely reverb back. With glide, like that. This will be, I think it's sort of an 8-bit thing. Yeah. You can see what I'm using. This does take advantage of the ARP. So I'll jump through and I'll include, I just played a bunch of them. I'll jump through and play the ones I liked. These last 5, or I guess these last 5 black keys, are set up to be arpeggios. And I guess if I haven't shown you the arpeggiator, why don't I just do this? This is an initialized patch. If I set this on latched and up and down, there's our sound. Movement from the filter. Amazingly simple, super nice. Latched will just stay down. You add more notes. Latch plus order sort of works like a sequencer, but there are some limitations. So if I like, it can do that, no problem. But if I then, right? So you can move around and play that, but you can't really repeat notes. So if I like, It's only doing each of those notes once. You can't really repeat notes, so it's sort of like a limited sequencer in that way. Up and down will play no matter what order you put the notes in. It'll rise and fall. And random will, whatever notes you put in, play them randomly. I think it's nice to have, but it's like so close to like functionality that I would really, really love. I think it has like some quirks to it that like you should sort of understand. But as an addition to like what makes this a complete instrument, I think it's really, really valuable. This is going to be a little jarring, but I'm going to cut to another setup for a second here. Here we are with a bunch of pedals. The Vongon Replay not only has a single mono output, which is perfect for a full pedal board, but also runs on pedal power. This is the same power supply that normally runs. This is normally the board for my lap steel, and I took the lap steel off. I put this on. I guess I replaced and a phaser instead of a compressor, but point is that this is an amazing companion for pedal boards. It's even spaced well. This is a Pedal Train Classic 2, I think they'd call it now. I've had it forever. And I've had all these pedals forever. I didn't pay more than $100 for any of these four. I guess it was a while ago too, but anyway, what I'm trying to get at. This is mono output with no built-in effects. I can see that being like, oh man, I wish there was a chorus. Again, if you're going to reference the Juno and the Poly 6, I think you should. But it isn't that big of a deal. You can get a chorus pedal for less than $60, less than $100. And chances are you might already have one, if that is so essential to you. Okay, that's the sort of chorus conversation done. But why is it only mono? The Juno 106 is mono until the chorus, and then it becomes stereo. The Poly 6 is mono even if it has its effects on. I think that mono output of a synthesizer is really not that big of a deal. And any of the stuff that makes the vintage ones stereo is probably effects anyway that I have no problem adding after the fact. And this sort of invites you to plug it into a whole pedal board anyway, which I'm just so into regardless. I don't know if you guys know, there's a whole series, The Synthesis Guide to Guitar Pedals, that I did years ago and stopped doing because nobody was watching it. But I think a synthesizer kind of needs effects to feel complete. Often the sounds do. And even if that is just ignore modulation, a delay or a delay and a reverb. But I bring this up later because I don't want to imply that this needs pedals. I don't want to imply that you need a full pedal board for this to sound good or to be interesting, but it does, like any instrument, like any synthesizer, really flesh it out and sort of open up a lot of the possibilities. Lovely. think that's it for the pedal board. I'm probably going to end with arpeggio stuff. I've had an idea. So I think this patch with the arpeggiator is sort of the right way to end this, to end the whole video, really, to sort of summarize my thoughts on the replay. This is an awesome sound. The arpeggiator is doing a lot of the work here. It's making this interesting. A lot of the options that are unique to this are what make this interesting, even if they are, some of them, behind this editor or an alt function. I don't think that's a huge downside. I just want to make sure I reiterate that. You just have to be aware of it. This is awesome because of what you have on the panel, but a lot of the stuff that makes the synthesis sort of beyond, sort of special, is in the alt functions. Not a downside. And the arpeggiator, which is so interesting and does so much, has like a couple quirks that I'd still like to see changed. I've mentioned most of them. But this sound is sort of the point of like parameter edges, or like I really wish this was different edges, matter a lot less once you start actually using this thing. Like, it's so easy to sit down and look at like, I wish it did this, I wish it did this, and I am guilty of that. But when you sit down and, like, try and make cool sounds, it's easy to make cool sounds on this. This wants you to make cool sounds, you know what I mean? Everything you need to make really cool sounds is totally here. And that kind of is the bottom line for a synthesizer. And any of the other discussions about that are what make it perfect for you, you know what I mean? Or worth it to you. The fact that this is a great sounding instrument with the ability to make some really, really cool sounds makes it worth talking about to me. And like all that in the lens of, this is a super small company doing something they haven't done before. That is exactly what I want to highlight. That is exactly what I want the music industry to look like. I want it to be passionate people with good ideas. And Vongon is so clearly that, everybody who works there. I'm happy that they made it, and I'm happy that I get to try it. I think I'm just going to let this keep running like an old school Jorb video. You guys remember when I did that all the time? I just end with arpeggios. This makes me want to do that. So there you go. I'm Jorb. I love gear. I think replay's great. I think Vongon's very, very cool. I'm happy they're trying stuff like this. Hope you learned something. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Cheers and so long.